Hello and welcome to the High Desert Voices podcast. I'm Brie Castellini, and today we are joined by horror author Michael Picco, but we also have a little guest interviewer in Mr. James Van Pelt. So welcome, gentlemen. How are you doing today?
Lovely. It's great to be here.
I'm willing to grill him. I want his secrets.
We kind of shoehorned you into this episode, but I'm delighted that you're here. So, Michael, since this is ostensibly really an episode about you, tell us who you are and what you write.
Well, I am a horror writer. I've been writing for about 15 years. I've published in about 24 anthologies. I've produced 3 short story collections and 1 novel. And I'm working on a 4th collection, which is tentatively called These Wretched Bones.
Okay, very cool.
Visions of Hell.
Visions of Hell. I love that.
Yes.
Maybe a little too real for me right now, but you know, we're going to get through it together.
Right.
So something I like to ask authors, especially genre authors, is what blooded them, which is very appropriate for this conversation. But what is the horror fiction that blooded you? What do you remember your first horror?
Yes. And it got me early. Mm-hmm. So back in like 2nd or 3rd grade, we had those Ranger Ricks.
Oh, yeah.
Remember those?
Yeah.
And they had included a story by H.P. Lovecraft, Stranger, right?
Okay.
And I read that, and I was absolutely hooked. I was like, this is amazing.
How old were you?
Oh, 2nd or 3rd
He said
grade.
2nd or 3rd grade, which makes me very concerned.
So I just absolutely loved it, and I caught the bug then. And, you know, I strayed into fantasy, you know, with Tolkien and Moorcock
Sure.
and those guys for a while, but they just didn't give me the same thrill as horror did. So I caught the bug early, and I never quite shook it.
That's amazing. So did you always know that you also wanted to contribute to this genre, or were you at first just a fan and, the creation came later?
The creation definitely came later.
Okay.
You know, I was a English major in college. And, you know, of course, the goal of any English major, I think, is to publish. Mm-hmm. You know, you may say, well, I want to go into teaching. But, you know, ultimately, you kind of want to get your stories out as an English major.
Yeah, you're not learning writing for other people. You're learning writing for you.
Exactly. So, you know, that's when I kind of thought to myself, hey, maybe I have something to contribute to the genre or to, you know, the literary canon as a whole. Because I wasn't always writing horror. I was writing science fiction. I was writing poetry. I was writing, you know, very strange kind of slipstream stuff.
Okay.
A lot of odd stream of consciousness kind of things. You know, Hunter S. Thompson was a big influence for me back then.
Okay.
So, you know, that kind of gives you a flavor of
Sure.
the direction that I was trying to imitate at the time. But then, you know, as Jim mentioned during his interview, I read Persig, and the art of Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance was just absolutely blown away. Could not believe it.
Can one of you describe this book to me? Because you've both mentioned it several times, and this has not come up in any other conversations for me. So please pitch me this book. What is this book about? Why do you speak of it in such reverent tones?
Well, it's very high country of the mind.
Okay.
Right? So, and that's a term that Persig uses in his book. He delivers this philosophical debate in the voice of this character that he calls Phaedrus. And it talks about, you know, what is quality? What is, and forgive me, it's been 20 years since I've read it, so I'm a little sketchy on some of the details now, but what is quality? What makes things true? What is truth? And I mean, it's really very dense, complex reading and complex thinking. I took it as almost a 400 level class in college with my professor, Jim Burrell. He was teaching a class called Vampire and the Modern Myth. And
That's a great sounding class.
Yeah,
I want to take that class.
It was wonderful. But that was part of our required reading. So, you know, we were being exposed to, you know, of course, Dracula and Carmelia and, you know.
And Twilight, of course.
Oh, no. No.
No, there was no close reading of Stephanie Meyer's saga.
No.
Well, we can't have everything.
Yeah, that's kind of a trigger item for me. So,
Oh, no. Okay, I'm so sorry.
but yeah, it was just the philosophy of that was just so amazing.
Okay.
And I find that there's nothing else at all like it out there on the market. And it's just so engaging and so thought-provoking. You could read it a dozen times and never get all the nuance out of it.
Okay. Anything to add, Jim? Because I know you've read this book semi-recently, right?
I did because I was giving a talk on what is good, and how could you not read Persig if you're going to talk about what is good? It is a dense book. Although when I reread it now, I don't know why I was stumbling over it at first. But I would start it, and I got like a quarter of the way through, and then I'm lost, and I put it down, and then I'd get a third of the way through, then a halfway through, and then I read all of it. And what really worked for me was realizing that it's not just a philosophical discussion or a road trip book. It's an actual novel about the narrator's relationship with his son, who is traveling with him. And he is so self-centered on his own issues. He'd had a mental breakdown. The Phaedrus that he talks about is really sort of who he was before his mental breakdown.
Sure.
These ideas he's talking about is part of what gave him the breakdown. And it got very dramatic for me. And now when I read it, I like his descriptive passages, riding on a motorcycle and thinking over these issues, talking to his friends who are on the trip who serve as kind of philosophical foils to some of the ideas. And it's a book that bears rereading, and there aren't a lot of books that really hold up well second, third, fourth time through.
Yeah, I think if I was on a desert island and just could bring one book, it would be that.
Okay. Wow. High praise. Probably good for kindling. It sounds like a long book, so maybe you could, tear a couple of pages out and burn them for warmth. So speaking of your experience in college, I'm curious as a genre writer, because I feel like when I talk to genre writers, we have very disparate experiences in higher education. Did you ever feel like people were looking down on you because you were more of a genre writer? Did you have that sort of like inclination to do litfic briefly because you're like, well, I have to write something serious for my teachers?
No, not at all.
Okay.
I was always very irreverent.
You were self-actualized early.
Well, I wouldn't go so far as to say that, but I wrote a satirical column for the college newspaper.
Okay.
And was always very much the kind of a tongue-in-cheek kind of writer. And I found that I enjoyed making people laugh and getting them to, kind of provoking them to think with satire. And those skill sets, and turned in another direction, worked very well with horror.
Say more on that. Comedy and horror being similar.
Yeah, well, they are emotions that are largely beyond the bounds of your control. I think you can kind of feel yourself falling in love. You can kind of feel yourself, getting angry. But laughing happens all at once. Being scared happens all at once. And I find that, those what is it, the amygdala in your brain, those ones that tickle the amygdala are the ones that really resonate with me.
I guess also it's a sense of like it happens very quickly, where it's like suddenly, you're the what works about comedy and horror is the surprise.
Yes.
And figuring out how to like balance surprise with tension and, different kinds of tension, certainly. But I guess that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. I never thought of it that way. I love that. So on that, what scares you?
I wrote an entire essay in my first collection about, it's called The Horror Writer and the 10 Grizzly Bears. And it is a commentary, a kind of a broad commentary on Stephen King's The Horror Writer and the 10 Bears. He wrote that in, I believe it was Kingdom of Fear.
Okay.
And, because the same question was posited to him, what scares you? And so what I did is I took that list of his and I kind of expanded on some and I discarded some and I made up some of my own. And so, 17,000 words or less, that was the kind of the capstone to Scenes.
Okay.
Because Scenes was originally intended as a showcase for different types of writing, essays, poetry, short stories, the whole works. You know, because I didn't know at the time that I was going to be producing more of these. I had scenes from the Carnival Lounge in mind since college. And so, you know, it was kind of a bucket list project for me. And I was like, you know, am I going to be able to not only have time, but the financial and wherewithal to produce more of these? So I kind of threw everything into that.
Okay.
But yeah, there's a long, long list in Scenes from the Carnival Lounge.
Well, how about more recently then? Let's narrow the list. Let's narrow the scope. What's scaring you right now? What are the things that you find most tantalizing and horrific?
Well, you know, it's hard to gauge that, especially in the environment that we find ourselves in these days.
Oh, the totally normal good one that everyone's
Yes.
just chilling in?
Yes, yes. You know, horror is kind of an everyday thing.
Sure.
So, and it makes it especially difficult for a genre writer to kind of build on that or amp that up or get people involved in that because they see it so much every day. They're inundated by it, right?
Right, yeah.
And, you know, the last thing people want is more anxiety, more scaring.
To be re-traumatized.
Right. So, you know, what I like to do is I like to try to give them something fresh to think about, something new and different, something that's, you know, beyond, you know, the standard werewolves, vampires, Frankenstein's, monsters sort of thing, and give them something that's, you know, got a unique kind of cryptid look to it, or a very weird psychological bent to it. That's, you know, not your everyday average slasher horror.
Sure.
I really despise clown horror. I despise puppet horror.
Okay.
Anything that involves, you know, a guy wearing a mask, wielding an axe, I cannot stand.
Well, because it doesn't scare you, because
It doesn't, no.
because it's just a person.
Well,
That's just a guy.
it's torture porn,
Sure.
basically what it is.
Okay.
And the only exception that I could say to that is probably A Cabin in the Woods, which is a movie that was released around 2013, I think. And it has Chris Hemsworth and a couple of other more famous actors. Sigourney Weaver's in it.
Is that the Joss Whedon movie?
It might be.
I think with Franz Kranz as the lead guy. Franz Kranz, I think is his name.
Maybe.
It's kind of like the satirical look at horror,
Yes,
almost.
yes. But it does delve into some of the tropes
Sure.
and some of the dilemmas and some of the pitfalls that
Sure.
I think the genre falls into a lot.
Okay, that's really
So,
interesting.
including slasher horror, zombie
Sure.
horror, that sort of thing.
Cool. So then for you, what do you find so cathartic about horror? Because I think, to your point, you know, when the world is maybe not as still and calm as maybe we would prefer it to be, when we're not in historic times, I think there's maybe a little bit more like, well, we need to get our adrenaline going. But when our adrenaline feels like it's at a 10 all the time, for you, why is horror something that you're seeking out? For you, you know, what does that look like?
Well, it's a good distraction, for one.
Okay.
So, you know, it keeps you away from the fire that's happening all around you.
Sure.
You know, you can at least disappear into this world where everything's contained within the pages, and you can be assured that, you know, the story is going to play out one way or the other, and that, you know, unlike real life, most of the stuff in the story is beyond your control. So
There's almost a release in that.
yes. And I think a good horror story kind of stretches you a little bit. It kind of gives you a little bit more flexibility when the horrors of the real world happen, because you're thinking to yourself, well, this is pretty terrible, but at least I'm not, you know, it's the whole Voltaire thing. This is the best of all possible worlds. Things could be so much worse.
Fair enough. The comparison being the thief of joy maybe is the opposite in this case.
Right, exactly.
Comparison is the joy here. Well, at least there's not werewolves happening.
Right.
Do you have any recent things that you're like, this is like the platonic ideal of horror? This is what I want out of horror. Books, movies, like what's great in horror right now, in your opinion?
I brought a couple of
I thought you might.
books. Yes. Of course, I would be remiss without ever saying something about Stephen King. You Like It Darker is a newer collection by him,
Okay.
and it really reflects a lot of his Richard Bachman kind of voice. And I've always liked Bachman better because he is darker than King.
Mm.
He's not afraid to take on some,
Monstrous topics.
well, yes, not only that, but some rather edgy ones.
Okay.
I think King tends to navigate a very kind of narrow spectrum of what's acceptable, and Bachman doesn't have those kind of restrictions on him.
He's
So-
playing bowling without the side.
Yes, absolutely, and usually with bowling balls that have fuses on them.
Ooh.
So Some Like It Darker. I've been reading this. I've been enjoying this. I've also been enjoying Joe Hill's collections of short stories. He's definitely got his father and mother's gift in writing. They're superb. I look for good things to come from him. So while I don't like having another giant to dominate the field like King did, I am pleased as a reader to have them handing this down to another generation, because brilliant storytellers. Also, I tend to read pretty much consistently collections and anthologies.
Okay.
So Ellen Datlow produces these every year. It's the best horror of the year, and they're just fabulous. They're just fabulous stories. They're drawn from all over the industry. She must have a staff of hundreds, because the first half of the book, like, this is all the summation, and I mean it's 60, 70 pages just of summation work.
Oh,
And
wow.
she covers film, and she covers literature and all kinds of stuff. It's fabulous, and it's a great barometer of where the horror field is and what's selling now. So you can pick one of these up and kind of get a feel for, this is environmental horror, which is very hot right now.
Sure.
This is something that's related to identity, which again, whether that's identities being stolen or LGBTQ identity stuff, you get a feel for what the zeitgeist is in the community,
Sure.
and that helps. That informs your writing.
So I was just going to transition into that for you personally, because we're going to hear from you later in this episode. We're going to hear you read some of your own writing. So staying zoomed out for right now, how would you describe the things that you're obsessed with, whether they're tropes, whether there's themes, maybe even just what are you obsessed with right now? What's defining your work?
I resolved this year not to chase rabbits.
Okay.
So the last 2 years I've been chasing open calls a lot
Okay.
and writing towards, satisfying a particular call.
Okay.
And I found that my writing was starting to suffer because of it. So I am trying to focus on the dozen or so stories that I've started, in the last 2 years, but just haven't touched or haven't finished, and getting those completed, and not having to worry about, does this follow the
zeitgeist.
well, the call of the anthology, or
Sure.
or any particular theme. I can focus just on the story itself, which has been enormously helpful. I'm trying to get more emotional in my stories.
Okay.
That is something that I'm experimenting with, because I find it so difficult and so challenging to write an emotional story, something that really gut punches you and makes you care about your characters. I find that that's an effective hook to get readers involved.
Okay.
If your characters are going through something terrible, you can empathize with them, or you could say, oh my goodness, this guy is a terrible person, he deserves this. So I'm trying to get more emotional in my writing.
Okay. More
And-
personal.
Well, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Any other common themes that you're noticing come up? Are you in a vampire phase right now? Are you in a creature feature phase? What's your...
It's always been psychological.
Okay.
Crazy narrators, unreliable narrators. Those are tropes I return to again and again and again. It's just that's where my mind goes. And I find that unreliable narrator just such a good vehicle and so interesting to encapsulate a story, because your reader's putting their trust in you, right?
Right.
Through that voice. And then you're reading along and you're like, well, that's a little strange. I wonder why they did that. And then you're like, oh, that's really strange. And then you're like, oh, this person's crazy. And I can't believe anything that I've read up until this point.
Suddenly I'm questioning everything.
Yes. And I think that it elevates the level of disbelief.
Sure.
And gives your readers, a little bit more interest in the story, rather than them just reading along saying, oh, yeah, this is perfectly believable. I believe everything that's happening in here. And, it adds another dimension to the story.
You said you have like a dozen stories. Could you talk a little bit about your process to write a story? I hardly ever can walk away from a story without finishing it. So I don't have a bunch of unfinished stories. So what is your process? How do you start? How long does it take to write a story? Do you write in the morning, the afternoon? Is there a lot of peyote involved? What is...
No peyote. I write in the morning. My drug of choice is very, very strong coffee. So, usually I'll make myself a pot of coffee and sit at my computer. And what I like to do when I start a story is that I'll have what I call a kernel.
Okay.
And it's just a central idea. It could be a scene or a phrase or an emotion that I want to work with, and I kind of spin the story out from that. By way of example, I wrote a story about a conscious zombie, someone who has, cognitive thought. And I start the story out where he's eating a baby, which,
Talk about a hook.
Yeah, well, that was the kernel of the story.
Okay.
And admittedly, I had a really hard time selling that.
No.
Yes.
We're not looking for baby eaters right now.
No,
That's
no.
not the zeitgeist.
He did sell it, though.
Yeah, I did sell it, though. But, it's usually with that kernel that I start, and then I kind of spin it out from there. And so I am very much the opposite of you. I do not outline. I am very much a pantser.
Sure.
And
But also short fiction, it kind of needs to pants it. You kind of
Yes.
need to just feel the moment and see where it
Yes.
takes you.
By way of example, this latest one, this one called Grub Baby, that I'd like to read a passage from.
Great.
I had this idea about this caterpillar-like thing that lives in the basement and just gets huge, just gets steadily huger and huger. And so I've kind of brought the story up around that.
Okay.
And kind of woven the story around that kernel of that image. And it didn't print out very well here, but that was the initial image that I was working at. So with this lady comes down to the basement, she's got this flashlight, and she sees this tremendous, grub that's, as big as a Volkswagen.
Sure.
So
Did you find the image before you started working on this?
this was actually, I generated that with AI, which I find is probably the only good thing that you can do with AI is kind of it helps you visualize some things. But yeah, I did this with prompts.
Gotcha.
And it's funny because I've seen a similar composition now in 3 pre-made covers.
So maybe don't use it for cover design.
Yeah, never ever use AI for cover
So
or for writing.
numbers. You started this story or the zombie baby eating zombie.
Yeah, baby eating zombie.
Day 1 till you called it done. How many days? How many writing sessions? How much of that time is spent editing?
Hard to say, because honestly, I switch up. So I will write one story for maybe a day or two, and then go to another one, and then go to another one, and then go to another one. and then I'll go back to the first one and maybe edit that, with fresh eyes. And I jump around a lot.
Got it. So you regularly have like multiple projects going at once.
Yes, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't. That level of discipline is fascinating because I do not have that either. I'm saying, me and Jim are both like, but when is it done? How many hours did it take? And then it's done, and you're happy, right?
It's done when I say it's done, and when I'm happy with it.
Sure.
It doesn't go out the door until I'm really satisfied with it. So what my process is I'll write it. I do what's called a rolling edit. So I will write a page or two and then go back and like spot edit that.
You're editing as you draft?
Yes.
Now that is discipline that is
So
wild.
I'll go and edit it, and then I'll the next day I'll open it up, I'll edit it, and then I'll write a little bit more, and then I'll go back about halfway to where it was before. And so it's just this rolling thing that I'm doing. So I get a chance to catch up on the story and familiarize myself with some of the details on that first editing read. And then I'm like, oh yeah, I want to do this. And I'll write a passage, and then I'll leave that there. I won't go back and mess with that day. I'll do that the next time I visit the story. So it always has, the manuscript always has time to settle. I think that a lot of writers shoot themselves in the foot by editing as they go, but I find this rolling method to be an effective tool to keep that internal editor quiet, because you can say to him or her or them or it, you'll get your turn. You'll get your chance to look at this. Shut up for now. I'm working.
You're almost doing like an exquisite corpse with yourself.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So, that's kind of my process. I mean, I had a story that I'm putting in Tangled that I started back in 2016, and it's called All the Angels, All the Devils, and it was about during one of the hurricanes. I used to live in South Carolina.
Okay.
And during one of the hurricanes, there was a story on the news about caskets that would pop out of the ground from the flood.
Sure. Yeah.
Because not all the cemeteries down there require vaults. So here in the high country, we have vaults for everything. But in some of the poorer communities down south, they just dig a hole and plunk it in. Well, those holes fill up, and of course the caskets are airtight, right?
Yeah.
So they pop to the surface. And I thought that was a wonderful idea.
Yeah. Wonderful is certainly a word that we could use for this thing that you've just described to me.
But I couldn't figure out the story behind it. So
Sure.
it took me a while.
It was more of an image, but
Yeah.
there was nothing attached to it yet.
It took me a while to find that voice. And when I found the narrator's voice, which is this adorable little girl, she's just wonderful. She's just got such spirit to her. I really enjoyed it. I had a beta reader tell me, he's like, yeah, he says, when I started this, he says, I didn't know where you were going, and when you finished it, I still don't know where you're going, but damn, what a ride. So, it's the world through her eyes, and it's her perspective, and it's, she's thinking about all the weird things that the adults are doing and all the weird things that are happening in the world. And I found that encapsulated a lot of my time in South Carolina.
That's really neat.
Yeah,
I love that.
reflected in her.
And it's a good example of like sometimes something, there's a story here, but maybe it's not the time to capture that story yet. And it's not, don't lose that. I call it my writing wish list, is whenever I have one of those sparks where I'm like, this is something. I don't know what it is yet, but it's something. I'm not ready for it. I'm doing something else, but I have it in a list so that whenever I'm like, what am I going to write next? I can go through it. And then sometimes you're like, oh, I've lived an extra year or two. I know exactly where that fits.
Yes.
So don't lose those things. Just because it's not going somewhere right now doesn't mean that it can't go somewhere eventually.
Absolutely. I
2016, you said, right? That was when the spark came.
Yeah, that was when I had the idea,
Was-
and I
Dang.
just finished that last year.
Wow.
So and it was slow going because, like I said, I didn't know where it was going. I didn't know where it was headed, but eventually, it made it to that scene, and that was the climax of the story, where she sees the coffins floating down Main Street.
It's a pretty good example, too, of I think the point that I try to get when I ask that question about process is it's different for everybody.
Yes.
So I know beginning writers, and I was like this, would go to panel presentations where there are a bunch of writers up there, and they'd be asked that question, what's your process? I always took notes like crazy, prodigiously, because I was waiting to hear, well, what's the process? But it turned out that everybody up there did it differently, and sometimes disagreed with each other, violently about, no, you have to do it this way. I said, no, I don't. And yet they all produce work. So I think that rather than trying to find the secret handshake, you just need to try to produce your work, however you produce it. And that's why I kind of like your answer, because I could not do what you do. I could not have a bunch of unfinished things that I kept hopping to, partly because I spent a lot of time trying to get myself in the mood of the story. And if I leave the story for too long, I lose the mood.
Yeah, I was going to say same thing for me is like if I abandon a story, it's because the story is not viable. Maybe not for now. Maybe eventually I'll go back to it. But it's like if I find myself seduced by another idea, that's because the old one was not going anywhere, and so I need to let this new one breathe.
Oh, I chase rabbits all the time, and I think that that certainly plays into my ADHD.
Sure.
That part of me who needs. I was a graphic designer by trade, right? And I worked in a print shop and had things thrown at me just constantly all the time. So creatively, I'm kind of in that mindset's ingrained in me at this
Gotcha.
point. And I found though that I even did that in college, because I was an art major in college, and I'd have canvas here, canvas here, canvas here, canvas here, canvas behind me, and I would take it and I would paint. And then I'd turn and paint something else.
Oh my
I'd
gosh.
turn and paint something else. And it was wonderful to be able to switch gears and to explore different things. You might come on your palette with a color that you just didn't quite expect. And you might think to yourself, oh, this would go great on that painting. So why set up a whole new painting when you got it right behind you? Just mix it up and dab, 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 and then go back to what you were doing.
That is fascinating.
So it's just, as Jim says, you have to do what works for you, and
Absolutely.
you have to discover what works for you. And there is no single path to the top of the mountain.
Yeah, but it just takes one step after another.
Yes.
How fast you take those steps, what order you take them in.
And
That's what makes us fun, is that we're all different.
That's a thing that both of you far outstrip me on as far as volume. I am glacially slow as a writer.
Sure.
And I aim for about 500 words a day, and then I'm cashed. In fact, a extremely good day for me is like 750 words. And I'll tell you, I have the guy I wrote the novel Frasier with. He is a prodigious writer. He'll write 3,000 to 5,000 words at a time.
Mm-hmm.
And I told him, I said, I can't keep up with you. I said, you go ahead and write, and I'll come behind you and kind of pull everything together.
Sure.
And that's how we ended up writing Frasier.
That's cool.
Yeah, it was much more. He is very much more an expositional writer.
Sure.
And I am much more a character writer. So we were a good fit, the two of us.
That maybe sounds like another episode that we should do sometime is co-writing and like the sort of joys and challenges of marrying a creative vision with two very different artists.
It tested our friendship.
Yeah.
It really did. And we both have a better appreciation for each other creatively and what our vision is. Frasier was his story. I told him from the start, I said, I'm just here to help you tell it. But it has gone in like a completely different direction than either of us had intended from the get-go.
Well, it sounds like we're going to have to check back in on that at some point. But for now, I want to hear about what you're going to be reading us a little bit more. So give us this is the slug that keeps the...
Yes.
What if Clifford the Big Red Dog was gross and buggy? Anything else that you want to share about this story, about what inspired it, why you brought it in today?
Yes, it's a story about child loss.
Okay.
Which is something that I've wanted to write about for a while. I have been in several relationships where women have lost children, and it's a horrible experience, and certainly not something that I want to make hay on. but I find that it really illustrates the state of mind and there's that horrible thing here, but then, oh, it gets so much worse. And then, oh, that gets so much worse. So that's the kind of thing that I'm playing with. And I tend to do these in my writing. I wrote a story about a concentration camp, which, again, a horrible subject to write on. Horrible. People, my critics usually say, don't make money off of somebody else's misery. And, I acknowledge that. And I'm not trying to do that. The settings that I put these in and the characters' experiences are just stepping off points to what I'm really writing about.
Sure.
It's kind of a point of reference, a starting point. So yeah, that's what Grub Baby is about on the surface.
So that's the title, Grub Baby?
Yes.
Great.
Tentatively. And not Grub, Baby.
Sure.
Grub Baby.
1 word, 2 words?
2 words.
2 words. Grub Baby.
Grub Baby.
Grub Baby. Grub Baby.
Grub Baby. Okay. This is a new story that I've been writing. It's in development. I am tentatively calling it Grub Baby. That's 2 words, no comma. Grub Baby. 2 weeks ago, she awoke to the sound of a baby crying. No, not just any baby, my baby, a voice in her weary mind argued. Still, mustering the understanding of what was happening was like trying to knit smoke. Yes, Gracie, my baby. She wasn't sleeping through the night anymore, the voice gently reminded her. Something in her mind fluttered then, a fragile and delicate thing, like a butterfly struggling to free itself from a spider's web. She struggled to shake off the stupor, the fatigue. As she emerged from the depths of sleep, her torpor began to drain away, disgorging the slumber that had pooled there. Sleep and rest were swept away in the tide, like the dreams she could never quite recall. Exposed to dreary wakefulness, the dreams evaporated, their substance replaced by confusion. Grace? More cries, more strident, then suddenly cut off. Marina's eyes snapped open and she sat bolt upright in the bed, her ears strained for the sound. But there, in the inky twilight, there was only the bleak and lonely howl of the wind. She held her breath, trying to make sense of what she'd heard, until the roar of blood pounding in her ears drowned out her every thought. Had she heard a baby cry? How is that possible? Her heart started to hammer in her chest, and at last she took an unsteady breath. There was no baby. Of course there wasn't, Marina. And there certainly wouldn't be a crying baby, would there? The house was empty now. The house, the crib, her heart, all empty. The same voice in her mind that had been so sanguine only moments before had changed. There was a sort of mocking cruelty in it that she didn't recognize. The bed creaked as she struggled to free herself from the tangled covers. She fumbled for the blanket that she'd used when breastfeeding, clutching it to her face, inhaling the fragrance. Just breathe, she whispered into the darkness. All at once, she registered the voice in her head. It was her own. The baby's scent was already fading. How long before the scent disappeared altogether? Marina pushed the thought aside. She told herself that she would always remember her daughter's inexplicable bouquet, how it soothed her, how it quelled whatever equivocations and misgivings she had scratching at the edges of her postpartum mind. She glanced down at her nightshirt, noticing that it was blotched with new stains. Colostrum stains, she observed bleakly, and why not? Her mind could barely accept the loss. Why would her body be any different? Tears quietly overwhelmed her. She drew the blanket beneath her chin and collapsed back onto the bed. Already the sheets had cooled, and instead of the warmth she so desperately hoped for, she found only the clammy tangle of her bedspread. She squirmed against the dank pillowcase, trying in vain to find a spot on the pillow not soaked by tears. You've been crying in your sleep again. Perhaps it had been a dream that had awoken her. It made sense. More than anything else did these days, she mused. Lately, her dreams seemed as ephemeral as the baby's waning scent. She flipped the pillow over. Cold, but at least it's dry, the voice in her head reassured her. It was a wonder she had any tears left after all she had shed in the last few weeks. Her eyes ached and burned as fresh tears pattered onto the pillow. From this perspective, the pillow appeared stained and yellowed beneath the musty pillowcase. Marina imagined how the stains formed an odd cartography of grief and loss across its landscape. In her mind's eye, they manifested into whole landscapes, whole landmasses of despair rising up from oceans of loss. She clenched her eyes shut, trying to eradicate the vision of a map charting lands brown and barren, nestled beside vast yellowing seas. But her weary mind seemed insistent on tracing its desolate shores. She rolled over and resorted to staring at the ceiling instead. Her back and her neck snapped and popped as her weight shifted, but she barely noticed. A gust of wind rubbed its muzzle against the window pane, searching for a way in. The house creaked and settled around her, the eaves shifting in the darkness, as though it too had grown restless and arthritic. Like her, it groaned deep in its bones. Something seemed to tumble through the dark, causing her heart to shudder in her chest. Maybe she'd been awoken by the wind. A faint shimmer rippled across the ceiling, followed by the low rumble of thunder. Ah, the wind. Or maybe just thunder. Yes, it was probably the thunder that had awoken her, she assured herself. She waited in silence for the next thunderclap, but it never came. The storm was ebbing, retreating to the lost places where storms dwell. How did the old song go? Listen to the wind blow, down comes the night. That's so appropriate, Isaac would have teased her. For the briefest of moments, she imagined him lying next to her. Yes, the nights did seem to descend on her, enveloping her as the bleak hours passed, her thoughts racing through the endless shadows. Damn the dark, damn your lies. The song droned on in her head, suddenly provoking an anger, a darkness that seemed to feed on her misery. It was a hunger that she couldn't satiate. She didn't even know if that was possible, or if she wanted it to be. The melody chased the possibility of sleep away, erasing it so thoroughly that the very notion of sleep and calm and rest seemed to have been banished from the world forever. She blinked in the darkness, breathing and listening carefully to the wind. The house creaked but was otherwise still. What was she listening for exactly? Hypnagogic auditory hallucinations. Isn't that what her doctor had called them? Auditory hallucinations are fairly common, he told her distractedly, and perfectly natural when you're under stress. She remembered that he paused there. She could still vividly recall the reek of his cologne, how it mixed with the antiseptic odor of the clinic like some kind of fragrant poison. Fairly common. An unexpected chill worked its way up her spine and nestled quietly on the nape of her neck. Its weight choked her. He'd used that phrase before, hadn't he? The same doctor had told her not to worry, that pregnancy complications like her were, quote, fairly common. So, they're like dreams? She'd asked, trying desperately not to scream. Well, they're similar to dreams in that they can feel very real, or, in your case, sound real. But they differ from dreams because they tend to occur during transitions into and out of sleep. He paused once again, searching her eyes for some understanding. Marina brushed away an errant curl with an unsteady hand. She hadn't slept in days and felt utterly wrung out. Recently, her mind had become blunted and focused. She blinked, trying to fully digest what he was saying. They tend to be more pronounced when a patient has experienced some kind of traumatic event. He let that phrase hang in the air, like a noose. She had laughed then, an uncontainable snigger that sounded more like a bark than a laugh. Traumatic event, she repeated incredulously. At the moment, it was as though someone were speaking through her. It was her, but not her. Someone pretending to be her. Someone wrapped in her skin, pantomiming her. Because all of this couldn't be happening to her. It had to be happening to somebody else, to someone else, somewhere far, far away. A place where her dreams didn't torment her. A place where her mind wasn't steeped in drugs. A place where she wasn't so dreadfully alone. A place where she felt something other than grief. A place where babies didn't die in their cribs. Yes, that most of all. The doctor crossed his arms and regarded her with a clinical stare. The starch in his crisp white jacket creased against his Ferragamo tie, and again the thought of a noose came to her mind. I'm going to prescribe you some Xanax. I want you to use that in combination with your antidepressants, okay? Take one before bedtime, and that should alleviate the sleep disturbances you're describing. Beyond the memory, the wind blustered, blowing her awareness back to the present. The Xanax didn't help, though, did it? the voice in her head murmured. In fact, it had merely added fuel to her nightmares. How many times has her dream shaken her out of her sleep? How many times had she awoken in the middle of the night to the sound of a baby crying? How many sleepless nights had she laid there in the dark, vacant and numb, so desperately tired, staring up at the ceiling, watching the shadows shift and skitter across her bedroom, listening, waiting? How many nights, how many endless hours has she spent laying there watching the silhouettes of the denuded branches as they endlessly scratched over the walls, as though they were trying to unearth some grand divine plan? But no grand design had been revealed. Dead children apparently didn't merit divine revelation. That was the only revelation granted to her, served to her in tablespoons of inconsolable grief. By day she was no better. Her fatigue clung to her like a pall, and weary wakefulness unveiled its own suffocating nightmare. By day she'd wander aimlessly from room to room, not knowing where she was going or why she had come there. She stared at the television for hours without remembering what she'd been watching. The dreadful monotony of living. Wasn't that how Sadie described it? Each day bleeding into the other, and another, with only the ragged threads of grief to stitch them together. She considered the last 3 weeks. Had she slept through the night at all? Since Gracie died, she said. There, she said it. She whispered the words into the darkness like a prayer, a requiem, as if in response a gust of wind buffeted the house. The roof creaked and the wind moaned as if echoing her lament. She clung to the blanket as the storm swirled around her, her mind adrift on the wind.
And that was the first scene of Grub Baby by Michael Picco. So, Michael, thank you so much for joining us. Jim, thank you for joining me for this interview. Michael, where can people find you and your work?
www.michaelpicco.com, Picco. You can also find me on Amazon, and I'm also on the Denver Horror Collective's author site.
Very good. Well, all those links will be in show notes, so please go check those out. If Grub Baby spoke to you the way that I imagine listeners of this episode it will, thank you so much for being here. Thanks for listening to High Desert Voices. We will see you all very soon.
High Desert Voices is the official podcast of the Western Colorado Writers Forum, a nonprofit organization based in Grand Junction, Colorado. The forum's mission is to foster a rich and diverse writing community on Colorado's western slope that invites participation from diverse cultures, customs, and life experiences. The forum hosts Writers' Night presentations at the Grand Junction Center for the Arts on the first Tuesday of every month, where local and national writers give presentations on their craft. Sign up for the forum's free newsletter and listen to all our podcast episodes for free at westernColoradoWriters.org.